Families that have a hereditary cancer syndrome and don't know it are like entire families standing on train tracks. They don't even know the train is coming. And the train is mostly full of preventable cancers. 10 cancer deaths before genetic testing, 0 cancer deaths in my family since genetic testing. My sister, that's a year older than me, has now had cancer over 20 times. I know with all my heart she wouldn't be alive had we not had genetic testing, because these have been caught in early stages. If you are thinking of having genetic testing, do not only get tested for BRCA or only tested for Lynch syndrome. There are many other genes that cause breast cancer. There are many other genes that cause colon cancer. And if you get tested for Lynch and they're like, yay, it's negative, it may be a false negative because you actually have a different syndrome. I believe with all my heart one day I might die and have never had cancer because of genetic testing.
This is Genetics for Healthcare, a podcast for patients.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Genetics for Healthcare, podcast dedicated to patients and their caregivers to help advocate for a precision medicine approach to their healthcare, which includes treatment, disease screening and prevention, and survivorship. You can find us at geneticsforhealthcare.com, where you can go to all of our platforms. We have all the things, but I'm privileged to have a prolific patient advocate, an advocate for hereditary cancer testing, Diane Hardesty, on with us today. First of all, did I say your last name right?
You did. My husband says it's the hardest name to remember with a Y at the end. It's Hardesty.
Diane, thank you for being a guest with us and sharing your story on Genetics for Healthcare.
Thank you for inviting me. I love your podcast, and I'm excited to get to play a part in it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I had the privilege of meeting Diane at My Faulty Genes celebration banquet for cancer survivors, cancer previvors, and their caregivers who support them in Tyler, Texas. She brought the industry, Kathy Baker, shouts out, to Tyler, Texas, to talk about precision medicine and really making a difference. And I met you, and you told me just a smidgen of your story that we'll get in and unpack during this podcast. But I learned that you were able to track your family's history 6 generations back
Yes.
and tracing incidents of cancer in your family. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, at what point in your life did you become aware that cancer was prevalent in your family? Was it mother's side, father's side? How did this whole conversation become apparent for you?
It's quite a story. It's pretty shocking. Even when I tell it, it's like, wow, this really happened to my family. It isn't 6 generations back. It's generations back to my great grandmother, and then a few generations forward to now not my son's generation, but the generation after that are now part of this story. And when I first started telling my story about 15 years ago, I always said 5 generations. And then that next generation became old enough to have genetic testing. We had a couple of people positive for Lynch syndrome, and it was like, okay, I need to change all my slides. We're now at 6 generations. But what I love is that it's a 6th generation that is previvors, which was a word I didn't even know. To go back through the generations, we had 13 people with cancer. 10 of them died. 8 of those cancer deaths were on my mom's side of the family. So 2 of them were on my dad's side, but still 10 cancer deaths in one family is shocking. 8 on one side is unbelievable. My cousin, who was a year older than me, the son of my mom's identical twin, died at 31 of colon cancer. And it was shocking and devastating. The next generation, the hardest story probably of all, was my sister's son. Ricky was diagnosed with glioblastoma, brain cancer, at 16 and died at 19. And we didn't know about genetic testing. By then, my mom had had two cancers and died. She died the day after her 56th birthday. I believe she would have died the day before if she was not an identical twin. She had had colon cancer a couple years later, was having a lot of pain, was in and out of her doctors with an HMO in California, and they didn't run any tests, even though she was a cancer survivor. So that by the time they figured out my mom had stomach cancer, she had a tumor in her stomach the size of a cantaloupe. So imagine how long that was growing and how
Yeah.
much pain she really was in. They did this huge surgery. They removed her stomach, the tumor, and half of her diaphragm. So now she's in ICU, and every single breath causes her pain because she's had half her diaphragm removed. And on her birthday, she looked at her twin sister and said, "I'm not going to die today. I will not ruin our birthday for you." She held on for another day and died the day after her 56th birthday. Her twin died 2 years later after her fifth primary cancer. It was her son who had died at 31. And now my cousin dies at 31. He's a year older than me, and I'm on a mission to find out, how do I not die of cancer? My little boy needs a mama. I'm
Yeah.
looking at my cousin's two little girls, and they're going to grow up without their daddy. And I'm scared to death. And it was hard.
So when you were growing up, did you know the prevalence? Was it talked about openly? And when you did learn about this, how did that impact your outlook on life
Yeah.
before you became of age and experienced these things with your mom and your aunt and your cousin?
Okay. So sometimes, because my story has things like colon cancer in it, I talk about things that we don't like to talk about over the dinner table or whatever, bathroom things and stuff. But fair warning, TMI coming up. The way I found out there was something called cancer, I loved my grandma Maybelle, my mom's mom, so much. And I can remember as a little girl going to my mom and saying, "How come Grandma Mabel never spends the night? Our other grandparents spent the night all the time. How come she doesn't?" And my mom explained to me, "Well, Grandma needs to be at home because she has something called an ostomy." And I got to learn that Grandma didn't go to the bathroom as a little girl, number two, like everybody else. She had this
Mm.
bag attached to her. And that's why she always wore these really big shirts. And she needed to be at home so she could take care of that. So that's how I first learned about cancer. And then over the years, different people would be diagnosed. 7 colon cancers in my family, and 2 endometrial, gastric, bladder, pancreatic. Uh, it's a long list. And so we just, I remember when my mom called me to tell me my cousin had colon cancer, she said, "Well, it's happened again. Donnie has our family cancer. He got diagnosed with
Mm.
colon cancer." And we called it our family cancer. We knew it was genetic. It was kind of obvious, but we didn't know there was anything called genetic testing. It was just something that happened to people in our family, and most of them died.
At what point did you learn about genetic testing? Um, like, was there an event or something that happened? Because I know even before this was available, these events were happening, and um, were you actively trying to find ways for prevention? And at what point was germline genetic testing introduced to you?
It took me 10 years after my cousin died and my mom died of fighting to get answers. So here's what happened. I had, like my mom's favorite Bible verse, she had me read her 10 minutes before her final breath says, and we know, it's going to make me cry, that all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. I thought, oh, that's interesting that that was comforting to her while she lay dying. And I'm slow. I realized a couple months later, oh, that wasn't for her. She had me read that for me.
Romans 8:28.
Yes, Romans 8:28. Interestingly, Charlie Kirk's favorite Bible verse, which has been in the news lately. So let's go to my favorite. Well, no, there's so many Romans 8:28 stories in my family. When I was 29, I had been through many years of this horrible thing called endometriosis. I was in and out of the emergency room in pain. I had lost my first two babies, and it was miserable. I had a really bad case of it, and I couldn't get answers. One of my trips to the ER at 29, there was a doctor there who was like, well, we don't see anything wrong with you. Let's do exploratory surgery. They cut me open. They didn't even this was before laparoscopies. I mean, like big old incision across my belly, cut me open, looked inside of me, and said, well, we really didn't see a whole lot wrong, but your appendix looked a little bit inflamed. So we took it out, sewed me back up. Pathology report shows up and he's like, well, thank God we took out your appendix. I've never seen anything like it. You're only 29 and it was full of precancerous polyps. A month later, I'm still in all this pain. I have a new doctor and she says, I'm pretty sure you have endometriosis. I have another exploratory surgery. Yep, it's endometriosis. And I had a hysterectomy. At 29, my uterus was already precancerous. So at 29, I've got a precancerous appendix and a precancerous uterus. And this is when I know I have it. I have our family cancer. Thank God I had endometriosis. It may have saved my life. My cousin dies, my mom dies, and now I'm looking at and making all these phone calls to my family members, the older ones, saying who had what and how old were they. I'm building my pedigree because I need to find a way to live. I've got to fight whatever it is.
I think that's
So,
a good point for somebody who's listening. Um, Over and over again, Diane, I'm hearing these stories, and we can call it, generational, that people just didn't talk about their health care, right? We know that our great aunt died of something, but young, but we don't know what, right? Or they'll say the doctor said she had cancer in her lung. Well, that doesn't, and she didn't even smoke. Well, that doesn't mean she had lung cancer. She had, maybe metastatic disease. But knowing your family's history, having those conversations, I think, what is it? November is Family
family.
Share Month,
Yep.
right? Where as we get together for family reunions. In this case, Thanksgiving's coming up in November. We've got to know our family history
Yes.
so you can go in and share these things with your care providers, because there are people walking around who do qualify for germline genetic testing, which could reveal an increased risk of something at which your healthcare plan will pay for, more extensive screening, more frequent screening, and that may apply to you or your children at a younger age. So that is very powerful to be able to put that together. And you did that very intuitively.
Yeah. Well, I think 10 years of fighting for a diagnosis with endometriosis prepared me for another 10 years of fighting to find out what was wrong with my family. So here's what I did. I get this whole history and I see that the main things are colon cancer and stomach cancer and female cancers. By then, my female parts are gone, so I'm not worried about that. But I know I have a stomach and I have a colon. So I go to my family practice doctor and said, I need a GI referral. I had an HMO like my mom. I want a colonoscopy and an upper endoscopy. And I was told that if I didn't have symptoms, the answer was no. And I said, we've got 7 people with colon cancer, including the son of my mother's identical twin. I know I have whatever it is because my uterus and my appendix were precancerous. I don't think I need symptoms. I think I need to be scoped. Nope, no referral. So I went home, and this is pre internet. I looked up in my great big fat book that you bought at Costco. It was called the Mayo Clinic Medical Guide or something. Back in the day, that's what everybody had. And I looked up colon cancer. And when I saw the words rectal bleeding, I knew I could get a colonoscopy. Why?
Mm.
I'm a fighter, but I'm not a liar. When I saw rectal bleeding, I thought, oh, well, sometimes I have that because I have hemorrhoids and they bleed, and that's rectal bleeding. I know that's not necessarily what they mean, but it still is. So I ate a whole ton of fiber and started looking. And the minute I saw a little bit of blood, because I got a hemorrhoid to bleed by eating fiber, I called up and I said, I have rectal bleeding, and I got my first colonoscopy. I ate fiber and made myself bleed for 10 straight years. My HMO sent me to a different GI doctor every single year.
Good.
Colonoscopy roulette, never the same person, and never a consult ahead of time. I'm laying on my left side with my IV going, saying, nice to meet you, to another doctor, praying that when you wake me up, I'm not going to find out it's my turn.
Yeah.
10th year, another new doctor, Dr. Yvette David, and she looks at my family history. Oh, well, first of all, her office called and I said, oh, are you calling to tell me what prep to get? Because every year it changed and it never tasted any better. They said, no, we're calling to schedule your consult. Hold on, this is new. I get to meet her first? Yes, and make sure you bring your family history of cancer with you. So I go see her. She looks at my family history and she's like, oh my gosh, this is insane. And she said, I don't know very much about it, but I think your family might have something called hereditary non-polyposis colon cancer, which is what Lynch used to be called.
Hmm.
She said, can I have your permission to talk to another doctor about you? I said, absolutely. I love that she knows it's hereditary. So she talks to the other doctor, who I found out later is actually her husband, who's a GI doctor at the time at City of Hope. And he was
That's
like,
awesome.
this is classic HNPCC, send her to a genetic counselor. So she told me to go see the genetic counselor at City of Hope. You would think after 10 years of fighting for answers, I would have run to the genetic counselor. No, I, I, it's crazy to look back on, but I didn't go, and I'll tell you why. I knew I had it, and now I know a name for it. And she's giving me the scopes that I think I need to stay alive. And I don't want somebody to hand me the piece of paper that I know is going to be my death sentence. I didn't want it in writing. My
Hmm.
son was already, starting at 21, getting colonoscopies and endoscopies because our doctors had said 10 years below the youngest colon cancer, you need to start scoping your family members. So Chris turns 21, and he used to have a video about it, but it's not on the internet anymore. I don't know what happened to it. But he talks about, like, his friends are all turning 21 and yay, we can like buy alcohol the first time, and he's drinking colonoscopy prep and telling his friend, and they're like, wait, what's a colonoscopy? They do what to you? And it was pretty amusing. So I feel like I'm safe and my son's safe, and I don't want the piece of paper. But I
Hmm.
love that she knows it's hereditary. So every year when I eat fiber to make myself bleed so I can get a referral, I ask for her. And she's standing with her hands on her hips saying, "Did you go to genetic counselor yet?" And I'm saying, "No." That went on for 3 years.
I was about to ask, how long did it take to kind of get you over the hump? And so, okay, so what finally got you to the genetic counselor?
Right. It's funny. I have to say this. I was listening recently to your podcast with Kathy Baker from My Faulty Gene, and it took her 9 years to go for genetic
Yes,
counseling.
yes,
And here we are, fierce advocates who initially were like, whoa. So it's
yeah.
kind of an interesting thing. So here's what happened. She looked at me and she said, "Here's the thing, Diane. What I'm doing, an endoscopy and a colonoscopy may not be enough. I know more about it now, and there are other cancers you could be at risk for. And you're not being
Mhm.
given enough surveillance. And this testing could actually save your life." That had never occurred to me. Remember, I'm looking at it as a death sentence because
Yeah.
people in my family got cancer and died. So then she says, "And so here's the thing, if you have it, I'm going to keep doing what I'm already doing with you,
Mhm.
but you won't have to fight for the tests." Number one. Number two, if you don't have it, you won't need a colonoscopy and endoscopy every year. Hold on a minute. I won't have to drink that nasty stuff anymore? Well, that kind of is a reason. Maybe I should find out. So I went, found out I had, oh no, I went and said, "Yes, I want testing." And then my insurance company said, "Yes, we have an exclusion for genetic testing for hereditary cancer syndromes." The test at the time was thousands of dollars and we couldn't afford it. We were moving from California to Arizona. I put it on hold. A year after we moved here to Arizona, we got, you get like the little quarterly newsletter from your insurance company that says, "We changed this and that about your policy."
Oh yeah.
Husband is reading that little quarterly newsletter. I'm in my office doing income taxes. That's what I did for 30 years. He's like, "Diane, get in here." So I go rushing into the other room thinking, oh no, what happened? And he's got this piece of paper from my insurance company, excuse me, and he says, "Read this." Two little sentences. "If you meet guidelines, we will now cover genetic testing for BRCA1, BRCA2, and hereditary non-polyposis colon cancer." So I called City of Hope. I said, "I can get tested." And they said, "Okay, we'll do two things. We're going to FedEx you the test kit since you're, hours away. And we're going to make a follow-up appointment. You have to come in person for your test results. We don't do that over the phone." So I make the appointment. And for 2 months later, to give me plenty of time, I go to my local lab, get my little blood draw. They hand me my little tube of blood. I go home with it and I put together my whole test, like what the doctor's office normally does, and send it to Myriad Genetics. I
Mm.
go in, they give me my test results, and I'll never forget the moment of them saying, "You have hereditary non-polyposis colon cancer." And the first words out of my mouth were, "Oh, please, God, don't let Chris have this." I wasn't worried about me, but I'm worried about my son. And by now, he's got two little boys. So I'm also worried about my grandchildren. And I get in the car with my husband and I call Chris on the phone. I said, "I had it. I'm already praying you don't. You need testing." He got tested right away. He had no qualms about getting tested. And my only child I was able to carry full term did not inherit this. And it
Awesome.
ends with me. My grandbabies can't get this. It's over with me, other than other family members who got further generations. But my boy, and he's like, "Okay, yay, I don't have it. And mom, I didn't need any of those colonoscopies. He had had 10 years worth of unnecessary surveillance because now we know what caused it.
It's very informative for others who may have a similar experience, maybe not as extensive as cancer was prevalent in your family, but you know, if we live long enough, cancer is going to touch our lives. One out of every
Yes.
three people will develop cancer in the United States. That's, God forbid, firsthand someone you love or are close to, or even acquaintance, a neighbor, a relative, church member, something like that. And the goal is to turn something that is without a doubt intimidating, scary, into something that is empowering for us. And the family cancer, the family disease now has a name. We call it Lynch syndrome. That's the name of the test that you would have today. And as you just mentioned, and this is not so long ago when germline genetic testing, hereditary cancer testing, all those terms you can find on geneticsforhealthcare.com, or you can, just kind of do a quick smartphone search of those. They used to be thousands of dollars for which your insurance plan, in some cases, you had to put up a fight. Now we're talking most people can put this on a credit card at most, maximum
250,
exposure, $250, even if you don't meet guidelines,
250.
but you want to know this information. And so now this has a name, it's been identified. So since you've had these test results and you were able to share that with your son, how has this impacted your outlook? What are the discussions like after with your family and your providers? What did you do next?
Before I answer that, can I just say something that I think is really important about
Oh,
genetic testing?
absolutely.
You said the name of what you're testing for is Lynch syndrome. When I was tested, you either got tested for BRCA or Lynch. Now there's something called panel testing that looks at multiple genes. If you are thinking of having genetic testing, do not only get tested for BRCA or only tested for Lynch syndrome. There are many other genes that cause breast cancer. There are many other genes that cause colon cancer. And if you get tested for Lynch and we're like, yay, it's negative, it may be a false negative because you actually have a different syndrome. So I just wanted to make
Very good point.
that out there. I
Very
did,
good point.
yeah, I had panel testing later. So I initially had Lynch testing, and then my sister. So, talk about the changes in your family. My sister, that's a year older than me, has now had cancer over 20 times.
Mhm.
I know with all my heart she wouldn't be alive had we not had genetic testing because these have been caught in early stages. Well, number 9 was triple negative breast cancer. And my geneticist was like, hold on, at my annual appointment. You've only ever been tested for Lynch. Your sister has triple negative breast cancer. I think you guys need more testing. You might have a different thing also. And there's this new test that looks at several genes. It was a big deal because it was 25 genes. Well, now it's way more than that.
Yeah.
He said, I want to retest you to see if there's another cause. And we found out, no, we still only have Lynch syndrome. But initially, I was positive for a Lynch MSH2 mutation. My panel test discovered we also have a Lynch EpChem gene mutation. So there's 2 genes involved. So the panel test did reveal more information. But
The
yeah,
powerful point that
yeah,
I want to make here, um, because obviously this is not a medical show. We don't give medical advice. I'm certainly not a medical professional. You can find the links to the National Society of Genetic Counseling, NSGC, on Genetics for Healthcare to find a genetic counselor to consult with or to request a genetic counselor when you go to your PCP within their healthcare network. But I wanted to point out exactly what you said. So we talked about, Lynch syndrome. That is a no- that is a bundle of genes that makes up Lynch syndrome, 5 genes that make up Lynch syndrome. And there are other markers that also include genes. So the point here is when we talk about hereditary cancer testing, germline genetic testing, empower yourself with the knowledge that there are panels,
Yes.
comprehensive panels, comprehensive cancer panels, comprehensive metabolic panels, comprehensive whole genome sequencing that can tell you these types of information. And the reason why that's important, even if you don't show positive for a mutated gene or a gene variant today, we're learning more all the time about genetics. And the more observation we get with people being tested, you might get what's called a VUS, a variant of unknown significance. We
Mhm.
don't really know the function of that gene yet. But as time goes on, we get more information to say that this is a mutation. This is a pathogenic variant that can cause changes downstream that develops diseases like cancer, or they get more information and say, well, this is nothing. That we
Yeah.
get no information on the genes, and you can downgrade that to a benign cause. So, great point about panel testing. Always advocate if you're going to have these conversations for a panel, and there may be certain things your provider or your health plan may want you to do in order to get that, but it's available to you, and be sure to advocate for that when you go.
At the same cost. It doesn't cost more to get all the extra genes. It's exactly the same price. So,
That's right.
well worth it. So, you did ask me, well, after testing, how did life change? I had a lot of phone calls to make. Hi, I know what's wrong with us besides the obvious. I know what's causing the cancer in our family. I have it. I hope you don't. So, there's 4 girls in my family, my sister who's older and has now had cancer 20 times, and me, and then my 2 younger sisters, both of whom are negative, and we're able to stop getting regular colonoscopies until they get older. They didn't need all that surveillance. They don't have the problem. So that changed everything for them. My sister, Kathy, uh, wow, everything changed for her. I know she wouldn't even be alive. She's had cancer so many times, but caught in the early stages. Uh, One thing that really changed is how much easier it is for me to get all the surveillance that I need. I'm not eating fiber to make myself bleed anymore to get a test. I go into City of Hope once a year. I love that you talk about precision medicine. My main doctor is the vice president of precision medicine at City of Hope, Stephen Gruber. And when I first met him many years ago, he put together a team and they all take care of me. And once a year, they update my family history and my personal history. And they might say, oh, we need to add this, or maybe we don't need that anymore. But it's very personalized. There are NCCN guidelines that say how to manage people with Lynch syndrome that are gene specific for each gene because they have different risks. But they put that together with my history, my family history, and go the extra mile. And because of this annual surveillance I have now been stopped 6 times in the precancerous stage. 6 times I would have had cancer and didn't. We talked earlier about the word previvor. If people don't know that word, it's my favorite. A survivor is someone who's had cancer and they've lived. My sister is a survivor. A previvor is someone who has a hereditary cancer syndrome and has never had cancer.
Mm.
I just turned 68. I spent a great deal of my younger years waiting for my turn to get cancer and die. I wasn't waiting to get cancer and survive. I literally was waiting to die of cancer. I was afraid all the time. It was so frightening, especially when my son was little. Like I was just waiting. What's going to happen to Chris? And now, when I go into City of Hope every year, my 2 main doctors always go to walk out of the room to get ready to do my colonoscopy after they come in and say hello to me. And Dr. Edos always stops at the corner and turns around and he says, I know, Diane, don't wake you up and give you bad news because you want Previvor on your tombstone one day. I believe with all my heart one day I might die and have never had cancer because of genetic testing.
That is
Yes.
uber powerful.
Yeah,
You not only became an advocate for your family, which has made a difference of
yeah.
the before and after of having this information, but you're now also, and have for years, become a national advocate to raise awareness and education for others around hereditary cancer testing. What inspired you to do that?
Interestingly, when I was first diagnosed, only two of us in my family initially got tested right away. And one was my cousin's daughter, Debbie. And there was really not very much information out there on the internet yet about any of this. And so, on a really regular basis, we were calling each other saying, "Oh, I found an article. I'm going to send it to you." And what did your doctor say? And what did your doctor say? And we were each other's support. There weren't any support organizations out there except for one uh, that was great at the time because it was the only one around. I'm not going to even mention names because it's not someone I would refer you to now. If somebody finds out now they have Lynch syndrome, I am all over telling them go online and look up the Jacqueline Rush Foundation. They have the best Lynch syndrome information of anybody out there. I've heard a genetic counselor who's an expert in Lynch syndrome talk about how amazing their website is. But at the time, there wasn't a lot. There were no Facebook support groups like we have now. But Debbie told me about this chat room. Remember chat rooms?
Oh yeah.
That was about people with Lynch syndrome. And she and I got really active in there. It was people talking about, my doctor said this and that. And because we were both very active in there, uh, somebody from a nonprofit organization let us know that um, Myriad Genetics was looking for people who were interested in becoming advocates and patient speakers. So we went and had patient speaker training, and there were 12 of us in that first group. They called us the linchpins, and told us how to tell our stories, trained us about how to like reach out to news organizations to try and get articles written, and all about becoming advocates. And that is what started my journey. I then began working with different nonprofit organizations. There's one for colon cancer called the Wonder Glow Foundation, who I am still active with. And think if you have colon cancer, they are an amazing organization. Of course, My Faulty Gene, who you've interviewed, Kathy, and I am on her advisory board. Um, but in the process of all of this, I told my story many, many times. And I don't know how much time we have, but I have to tell you a funny story. And then I'll tell you a more serious thing about doing that. I was a brand new speaker and public speaking. I was the shy girl with the home office doing income taxes. Public speaking, no way.
Yeah.
Terrified.
Generally not the profile.
Oh my goodness. So I was asked to go to Northern California to this big all-day genetics workshop, and they wanted me to tell my story, and they had another speaker who had a BRCA mutation who was going to tell her story. We became very good friends, and sadly she's no longer with us. Genetic testing would have saved her life, but it was too late. And amazingly, in active chemotherapy treatment, she was out advocating on a regular
Hmm.
basis. But the keynote speaker of the day was Henry Lynch, as in, I have Lynch syndrome, the father of hereditary cancer. And my job was to tell my story and introduce Dr. Henry Lynch. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to meet this man. He saved my life. I'm just completely overwhelmed. I get there early in the morning. And usually, when I show up early, I find a place to sit and put my stuff down. Oh no, I waited in the back of the room. And when Dr. Lynch got there and I saw him go sit down, I went over to the chair next to him and it said, "Is this seat taken?" I kind of stalked Henry Lynch so I could sit next to him all day. I was so nervous to tell my story in front of this room that was full of the dream team of cancer genetics. It wasn't just Henry Lynch. There were some big deal people in that
Yeah.
room. So I get up and I've got my slides and I tell my story about my family and I'm shaking. And finally, I get to my last slide and I'm so relieved that it's over that I walked off the stage and I forgot I was supposed to introduce Henry Lynch. So somebody comes walking up and whispers in my ear and tells me, and I have to do the walk of shame back up to the stage, get a microphone. And I'm the whole time thinking, now what do I say? I'm just so embarrassed. And it ended up being a really great intro because I said, "You heard my story and you know the difference that this man has made in my life. 10 cancer deaths before genetic testing, 0 cancer deaths in my family since genetic testing." And I was so nervous to even be in the room with this man that I forgot the reason I'm here was to tell my story and introduce him to all of you. So let me introduce the amazing Henry Lynch. And all these doctors thought that was the funniest.
Perfect.
It was such a good
Perfect.
intro. He gives me a great big hug and he says, "You did a fantastic job, young lady." I was in my 50s. He was 87 years old.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
Wow.
my most embarrassing and my favorite moment of doing talks. The next year, I got to introduce his son, Patrick Lynch, at a similar workshop, which was really neat. Um, and then another thing I got to do that was really incredible uh, back, oh, I think like 2016, my son and I were asked to film an episode of a TV show called Access Health. And
Hmm.
our episode was about hereditary cancer and genetic testing. And they had a BRCA family. And then Chris and I were the Lynch syndrome family. And they filmed us telling our stories. And also on the episode, I thought it was such an unbelievable thing, was Christy Funk, who was Angelina Jolie's surgeon. And there was a really wonderful genetic counselor also. And it was really a neat experience. Uh, I'm embarrassed because I was so nervous that I had just dry mouth the whole time. But I love watching my son talk about his side of things and the difference that it made. It changed his life
Yeah.
having genetic testing. Not everyone who gets tested is positive.
Yeah.
Some people are
Yeah.
negative and everything changes.
As you've been out advocating, talking to different groups, what are some of the misconceptions about hereditary cancer testing or cancer risk that have come up from people that you may have spoken to, and how do you address them?
Gosh, good question, especially since it took me 3 years to decide. I think one of the biggest myths that people have is that they're afraid to get tested because they think they're going to be discriminated against based on genetic information.
Mhm.
Like, I'm going to lose my medical insurance. It's going to be a pre existing condition, is one of them. And the other, I might lose my job. But I don't remember which George Bush, but one of the Bush presidents passed an act called GINA, the Genetic Information Non Discrimination Act. And it protects us from being discriminated against based on our genetic information. when it comes to medical insurance and employment, life insurance can still discriminate against you because there's heart disease in your family, or you have diabetes, or any number of things. So that's still an issue. And I am not an expert, but I do tell people, friends that are like, I'm going to have my genetic testing, get a good life insurance policy first because it could be difficult later if you test positive. That's the only area. But other things, I wrote down some notes ahead of time, thinking you might ask me this. Oh, in my notes, I said something about insurance discrimination, but I said knowledge is the answer to combat that as a reason to not get tested. If you're informed and you know there's protection, now that's not a problem. But what I wrote down in my notes about this is my reason. And at one point, I wrote a whole blog post about why I was afraid to get tested, what changed my mind, and what changed in my family because of it. And the bottom line of it was, if you have a hereditary cancer genetic mutation, you were born with it. You have it. Knowing it or not knowing it doesn't change the reality of you're walking around with this. I was afraid of the wrong thing. What I
Yes.
should have been afraid of was having a hereditary cancer syndrome and not knowing and not being able to do anything about it. Knowing changed everything. 10 cancer deaths, 0 cancer deaths. My testing was in 2007. My sister would not be alive. My son would be getting annual all kinds of colonoscopies and things that he didn't need. I've been stopped 6 times in the precancerous stage. And so what I said was I had to replace fear with hope. And then hope turned into life. Me and
Absolutely.
my family. Everything
Absolutely.
changed when we knew.
In many cases in life, ignorance can be bliss, but this ain't one of them. Right? You want to know your genetic risk. You want to know your healthcare risk, period. So, like we say, knowledge is power. I do give a caveat to that. Applied knowledge is power. If
Yeah.
you have the knowledge and you take action on it through lifestyle modifications, communication in your family, educating yourself not only for your providers in your family, but also your insurance program. A lot of times they don't know, and so it helps to be armed with information to help get the treatment, the health care that you need and you deserve.
Yes. One other thing, you talked about people who are maybe a little bit unsure about testing. Number one, cancer, many of the cancers that I'm at risk for are totally preventable. And that has been true in my family. Um, and I know that even if I do get cancer, it's going to be caught in a really early stage. I'm followed really closely. And having my insurance take care of all of that became really easy once I had a diagnosis. But the other thing that I was thinking about, um, with people who are reluctant, is the reason that I met Kathy Baker of My Faulty Gene is she asked me to film a video for her, and they have something called Family Gene Share. There are three
Mhm.
to 5 minute videos of different people with many different mutations. There's people with a BRCA1 and BRCA2 or EpCAM and MSH2, along with TP53, you name it, there's a video for it. And they are all stories about how genetic testing changed that person's story. And so I would say if you're telling a family member, I just found out I have this, and they're like, oh, I don't want to get tested. And sometimes we don't want to hear information from somebody in our family, that we might listen to somebody else.
That's, listen, a prophet is not heard in his own land.
Yes. And that was the goal. of the Family Gene Share videos and project was to encourage cascade testing of family members. And so that's just at familygeneshare.org. And if you've got a family member who's unsure, I would highly recommend that.
Our missions are aligned, which is why we're walking similar paths, because the whole goal of this particular podcast is to reach as many people as we can, to give them the language and the confidence to have these conversations with care providers and their family members so they can become more effective advocates for proactive health just like this. And so, whether you're in treatment, whether you are a care provider, or you have a family history that makes you curious about these things, arm yourself with the information. Go back. Obviously, if you're still listening, subscribe to geneticsforhealthcare.com on our website, or any of the platforms that we've got that stream our podcast there. Go back and arm yourself with this information. Soon, we're going to have a search feature on our website that you can actually just kind of type in a phrase, whether it's breast cancer, colon cancer, a specific gene, and it'll bring up those episodes. So, Diane, I usually ask, for 3 practical tips. You've already given those 3 practical tips, so we'll kind of punch that and leave that as a clip. But any departing thoughts?
Yes. Oh, I'm glad you asked. I was afraid you were wrapping up, and my favorite thing to say, I didn't say yet. Years ago, as a brand new speaker, I heard a medical oncologist, Larry Geyer, speak. And he used an analogy that is so powerful. I have been quoting him for 15 years, and I even have his analogy on my business cards. And so here it is. And it always makes me cry. I'm going to warn you ahead of time. He said, families that have a hereditary cancer syndrome and don't know it are like entire families standing on train tracks. They don't even know the train is coming. And the train is mostly full of preventable cancers. So when you identify one person with a hereditary cancer syndrome, you may have just rescued an entire family from the train tracks. So, Rome, I think about that, and I love superhero movies. And I think about in the movies, if there's an entire family, and I'm not just talking mom, dad, kids, I'm talking grandma, grandpa, great grandma, 6 generations of my family were on train tracks and didn't know. 10 people died. Who in the movies rescues that family? It's someone wearing a cape with a really cool name. And honestly, people who do the work that you are doing, people like Kathy Baker or Joan Rush or Yvette David, who spent 3 years talking me into getting tested, those are the real superheroes that are rescuing families like mine from the train tracks.
Well, the proof in your superheroic efforts with getting tested and becoming an advocate has made a difference in your family with your 7 grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren forever. Diane, thank you for being a guest and sharing your story on Genetics for Healthcare.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. I appreciate you so much.
This is Genetics for Healthcare, a podcast for patients.